So okay, that was quick and dirty intro there. We're going to jump right into the presentation here. So essentially, we're going to be talking about the SEC and the audits from 2017. We'll take a look at what they had found, their action items, particularly in cybersecurity. And then I'm going to talk about some brief, just knowledge that I want to impart on you about audits in general and how they relate to cybersecurity. And then we'll just jump right into the cybersecurity exam initiatives. So starting off in 2017, the OCIE for SEC reported a number of findings that they were displeased about or had to fine different firms for. The number one was weak policies and procedures. They noted that a lot of these firms had proper cybersecurity, policies in place, but they were just canned or just, non-specific cookie cutter. And even though they would talk about the important points, it wasn't really relevant to the actual firm. It was clear that they just hired somebody, wrote a policy, and just left it there. So this is one of the things that has driven the 2018 initiatives for the SEC. They noticed there was very little to no risk assessments done last year. So a lot of companies hadn't been properly prioritizing their vulnerabilities or even had any real firm grasp on them. Another thing they found was untested prescriptive measures. So this is your business continuity, disaster recovery, incident response. These measures existed within the firms, but the SEC said they were either untested or, again, non-specific. And then they also noted that there was a lack of training amongst a lot of these firms. So they would go more the canned video, right? The same thing they did with the policies. It'd be more cookie cutter, not really specific to the firm and their operations. So again, these are the main things that really drove the 2018 initiatives. And as you know, SEC has been ramping up over the past 3 to 4 years on cybersecurity and making it a focus. So it's obviously something we're going to see get ramped up as we go along here. So before we jump into this, the top 5 initiatives this year, I want to just kind of give some brief wisdom on compliance and security in general. And the one thing that I really want to impart on you today and just kind of have it drive your all your thoughts throughout this is that compliance does not equal security. There's a lot of there's a lot of crossover between the two, and one can complement the other, but just because you are all checkmarked on your compliance points does not necessarily mean you're secure, and vice versa. Just because you are doing best practices for your specific firm doesn't necessarily mean you're meeting the compliance points of the SEC or other regulators. And I know that kind of makes the cybersecurity topic a little bit more nebulous, but I'll walk you through and explain, better examples of this. But it's just important to know that just because you're being compliant doesn't necessarily being secure, and vice versa. With audits and regulators, company size and culture matter a lot. And so does the fact if you've been previously examined or not. And really what I want to get down with regulators is that it can really be the luck of the draw here. So to be perfectly candid with you, I spoke with some people in 2017, some firms that we've worked with had an SEC audit, and they didn't have any cybersecurity questions asked. But on the other spectrum, we had people we worked with where it was completely focused on cybersecurity because that was just what the auditor was asking them. And then you had in between, which was having the top 5 and then basically all kinds of operational questions on the audit. But I just want to make sure you know that it's essentially the luck of the draw there. I mean, it really depends on if you've been previously examined and who's showing up your doorstep. But one thing I definitely want to mention here is that auditors can detect effort. It's the difference between a student who shows up to class the next day because they were up all night playing video games and failed their exam versus a student who was up all night studying but still failed the exam. Auditors can detect this through documentation and just basically your overall speaking efforts. So it's really important to be documenting any kind of compliance measures you're taking because it will help you when auditing season comes around for SEC, regulators, or even due diligence from other, however you're answering your cybersecurity. So just some things to keep in mind. So we'll jump right in here. We're going to talk about these 5 initiatives. These are in no particular order aside from the easiness to digest. The easier ones are listed first and the more difficult ones are listed later. And this is by no means saying this is the priority on the SEC's list. These are just equally weighted for them. But the way that I structured it is just to make it a little bit easier to digest for you. For each of these topics, we're going to talk about what it is, what it means to be compliant, what it means to be secure, and basically just some action items if you're left not knowing what to do right now. So hopefully you can walk away with some tools to get you ready for 2018. So cybersecurity training, awareness training. What is that? Well, it's pretty simple. It's training your end users on cybersecurity threats through the use of live training sessions or videos and or social engineering tests via phishing campaigns. Honestly, the goal of this, simplest terms, is just to keep your end users informed in whichever tools you're using. Typically, it is live session training or videos or phishing tests with social engineering tests of the such. Essentially, just making sure your end users are informed at all times. So in this form for the SEC in 2018, what does it mean to be compliant in training? Well, means that you're using relevant and unique information. And what I mean by this is that you have to show that you're not, if you have a recorded cybersecurity training video that you are giving your employees every year, that's not relevant and unique. You're using the same stuff over and over. You have to have a unique training session at least annually, and they like to see it annually scheduled. And furthermore, they like to see metrics on this. And what I mean by this is, okay, so are you using new theories to train your people every year? And what has it changed from last year? Do you have a list of the people who have and have not taken it? Are you giving them tests? And if so, who has or hasn't failed? So basically, these are the 3 points. You need to make sure that you have this down for if the SEC comes in. It's pretty simple. But again, goes past that, from the compliance versus security. What should training really entail to make sure you're doing the best for your employees? Well, first of all, make sure that your training is not just definitions. None of us want to sit through social engineering is and phishing is, those are important. But what's really, really important is that your users are pulling away practical examples and things specific to their daily lives. Ideally, it should be on-site and interactive. Those CBT, those computer-based training, and simple click-through things, they're not really fully interactive for the people. They're not engaging for your end users, so they're not going to pull as much away. They're going to sleep through it. It should be relevant to the company operations. There's no such thing as a glove that one-size glove fits all in cybersecurity. Your company has unique risks and unique daily operations that should be taken into consideration, and you can't get that from computer-based training. And it should be tailored to the role. Depending on your size, if you have 100 to 200 employees, or if you happen to have an in-house IT team, they need to be trained on cybersecurity as well, but they can't be put through the same training as your desk users, your analysts, and your traders, because they already know part of this stuff. They need to know things specific to their operations. So just something to keep in mind. And while the SEC is not directly saying you need to have phishing campaigns to be truly secure, to really know what your defenses are in the real world, it's best to be running internal phishing campaigns. And what this is basically you are simulating fraudulent emails sent to your end users to see where the weakness is, who's clicking and why. And honestly, at the end of the day, for training to be truly secure, your end users should be able to tell you what they're doing to secure your company. They should know the specifics in their daily operations. And the metrics that you have should be there to help those that are non-compliant. If you just have metrics of who has or hasn't taken the test, or who has or hasn't taken watched the video, then you're not really helping those who might not be getting it. Phishing campaigns and tests get you to help those people. And it's not a witch hunt. This is to, you want to use this to make sure your company is secure, because, honestly, it's everybody's responsibility. Your end users are your first and last line of defense. So training is pretty often overlooked, but it is really important. So for action items for training, what could you do right now? Well, if you don't have a schedule, you don't have any training, think about picking it now. Sit down with some cybersecurity professionals, hire somebody in-house. If you have to go the CBT route with computer-based training, schedule it and start thinking about it now. If you've already done training and you've got metrics, review them. See what you can do if you can get your next training session to be a little bit better than last time. Get employee feedback on the past. If you don't have the metrics, but you've given training, see what your employees liked about it. See what they didn't like. Use all that information and revamp your training. So it's, and again, we like to impart on everybody that security is everybody's responsibility. It's not just the execs in your technology. It just takes that one person, and just like the boss here from Dilbert, to enter in their account number, right? You're only as strong as your weakest link when it comes to training. All right, so next we're going to talk about incident response. And I'm sure that from an executive level, you've probably all heard of incident response. You probably deal with it daily, or not daily, but annually at least, I should say. And when there's ever a disaster. So essentially, this is the flow chart of a basic incident response, right? You prepare for it by creating your documents and getting everybody ready on their individual teams. Then when it actually happens, you got your step 2 where you can detect and analyze what's happening. Then that takes you over to containing it and getting rid of it. And then of course that channels into your post-incident activity, which should ultimately feed back into preparation. It's an evolving process, right? But there's a couple of caveats when it comes to security, especially in those middle 2 parts called forensics that we'll talk about. And incident response for an IT team is significantly different from what a security team needs to focus on. And cybersecurity incident response should have its own separate document. So what is incident response in terms of cybersecurity? Well, it's something called a CSIRP, or your Cybersecurity Incident Response Plan. And essentially what it is a playbook of all potential cybersecurity incidents. So what does that mean to be compliant? Well, do you have a CSIRP right now? Do you have a part of your incident response anywhere that actually deals specifically with cybersecurity problems? The SEC is not expecting everybody to look the same, but if you don't have some form of cybersecurity language in your incident response, that is what they're looking for. So you definitely need to make sure you have that. And as part of this, and most documents, especially policies around cybersecurity, they like to know that you have a change log. So usually the bottom page, you'll have in there the updates. When was it first released? How many updates have you done? It shows that you are regularly updating it and that you are keeping track of the updates. And then they also like to see tabletop exercises. This one is an extremely nice to have. And if you want to be extra safe, you definitely want to make sure for compliance points you're making or you're running through these tabletop exercises. And if you're not sure what that is, that's essentially assuming you already have your incident response plan, your CSIRP, and you call in the people involved in a real world example, but you actually just simulate a disaster and you all walk through it to make sure everybody knows their parts and basically catch any kind of the caveats there. So that's just basically from a compliance standpoint, right? It's pretty simple. Have the document, update it regularly, make sure you're doing tabletop exercises. But what does it mean for security? Well, when it comes to truly being secure with your incident response plan, you really have to put a lot of thought into your forensics portion and the aftermath, because forensics continues after the event. And what I mean by forensics is if somebody's computer gets infected with ransomware, you don't just pull that computer, you don't just restore that computer from a backup and just say, well, he's back, he or she is back online, so everything's fine. Forensics means eradicating and isolating that infected ransomware computer, but then going further. Okay, was this ransomware sent via email? Okay, well, what's the email address? Have they targeted other end users? Is there potential, was this a misdirect and there's other malware somewhere else on our system? Was this a targeted attack and this person is just going to channel their efforts through another employee? These are things that can't be answered if your incident response plan just basically says restore from backup and continue. Forensics is where you start finding those breaches that don't get discovered for a year or so. And that's the main reason, is because forensics is weak. So incident response plan should very much play on forensics. And it's a security role, through and through. You got to work directly with IT, but forensics is a heavily involved depending on what you're dealing with. And again, tested thoroughly. This shouldn't just be tabletops. This should be consistently thought about, your incident response plan. To be super secure, you can actually integrate it with your intrusion detection system. So have some talk about your defenses within the IRP, but also make sure that you have some form of intrusion detection system, which is essentially in detecting any kind of bad behavior on your network, somebody trying to poke and prod. And again, this should be a dedicated CSIRP. It should not be amended to another policy. It should be its own document and a driver for some other policies. And to be secure, your CSRP, if it's been around for a few years, it should be drastically different from your first. And I don't mean that you should be using different colors or pretty formatting. I mean the structure and the content should be changing regularly, because security impacts change regularly, and your plan should too. So for action items for incident response, if you have nothing right now, well, start with the checklist, because honestly, this is what a incident response plan is going to run through. It's going to run through identifying the threat. Step 2 is containing it. Step 3 is eradication and ongoing forensics. And step 4 is recovery with carryover forensics if it's still existing. And this is basically where you start. You go to your technology team and you say, okay, we need to come up with a play-by-play here. And it starts with this. It's not as simple as it is, but this is where you start. And then you start doing that for all possible security attacks. Okay, what happens if we get hit with, somebody found a keylogger? What happens if we're down because of denial of service attacks, right? Your IRP should be able to walk you through these. And you should define your roles now. Whoever's going to be a part of the incident response team, your executives, your technology team, maybe your office manager, start talking with them now about what you currently have on incident response and define who's going to be doing what. And as a part of incident response, you need to know what your listed defenses are right now. So it's a good idea to list those. Whatever you have, if you have intrusion detection, antivirus, start marking these down to put inside the IRP. And is it currently amended to your other policies, such as your disaster recovery? Get it separated. That'll help you with that compliance check mark. And if you already have one, just schedule your tabletop today and just get it out of the way for the year. Schedule something a little bit more in depth than you usually would if you're already doing tabletops. All right, so the next point we're going to talk about is access rights control. And you can tell these get a little bit more technical as we go top to bottom, but I'll keep it very high level. So what is access rights controls? Well, I want you to think of your infrastructure, your data, and your physical components, including your offices and file cabinets. Now ask yourself, who has access to what? What is the policy on that access? And who or what is reviewing that access to your infrastructure data and physical premises? What about random things like onboarding and offboarding and a temporary access? These are all controlled through access right controls. And if you can answer these questions and you don't have a policy, well, you should write the policy. And if you have these and you can't answer these questions, then definitely these are some good ways to look at it. But essentially, before you can control access, you need to know what. In the terms of compliance, what is the SEC and other regulators looking for? Well, they're looking for a documented policy that deals with specifically onboarding, offboarding, and general access requests, and an approval process. So you can't have a control without some form of approval process. So if somebody starts with the company, what do they get access to? What if they start with the company and they need to get access to something temporarily? How does that happen? Where's the approval process? They want to see individual groups or permissions. They want to know that not everybody is an admin in the Google email console. They want to know not everybody can change each other's passwords. And this is directly related to data classification. And this is kind of where that cybersecurity maturity framework really comes into full play here. You can tell that the SEC cares about access rights controls, but you cannot tackle access rights controls without data classification. Before you can decide who gets access to what, you need to know what you have to give access to. And tangent here on data classification, this is what's required beforehand. You need to know what data is confidential. What files and folders in your environment right now could you not share with anybody else at a lower have? Confidential is PII. Restricted information is no PII, but yeah. Oh, sorry. Told my camera may, or my sound may be a little bit choppy here. Sorry. Sorry about that. But anyways, it's basically going through all of your files and folder structure and just seeing which ones are confidential and identifying that internally. And then basically, figuring out of that data, which stuff is public or do you care less about? This is like things like your logos and your company website. It's just basically going through everything and finding out which ones you care about. Sorry, I had a little bit of technical issues there. So from access right controls, what is secure? Well, who's requesting those timelines and reviews right now? If you have a consultant who maybe had access to, a machine for 3 months and doesn't need it anymore, how do you get rid of that access? Are you regularly reviewing it and the timelines on these for temporary requests? Are you using role-based access? Right now in your company, are you, at your firm, are you giving a role access, a group of people? Or are you giving individuals access? Role-based access can make things much more streamlined to make it easier because you're giving the traders access to something, not just one of the traders. It helps for those oddball cases where you have access that is hard to track. And this goes directly again with data classification and segregation. Before you can give controls to these individual data, you need to know what data you have and how it's segregated from your public data or from your less restricted data. And it also goes directly with DLP, data loss prevention, which we're going to talk about very shortly here. But it also ties together with mobile device management if you want to be truly secure, because if you don't own your employees' devices, you need to have some form of way of enforcing what they're doing with their information and their rights on their machine. So to be secure, it goes past just having a documented policy, and it has more technology and ingrained into it. So again, for action items for access rights controls, if you're not anywhere right now, what can you do? Well, do that thing I talked about with classifying your data. Sit down with your security team, sit down with your technology teams, and walk through where your files are stored. Even if you're using Ignite or hopefully not, but Dropbox. If you're in those clouds, right, you can still go through them and find different folders and just make sure you're not crossing over the data, and make sure that or mixing up the data, and just make sure that you know where your important files are. That'll help you with deciding who gets access to what. Next part is inventory your hardware and software too. Get a list of all the pieces of server equipment, end user desktops and laptops, and get an idea of what everybody has. Then group your employees together into roles. Put your traders into a group on Ignite or Dropbox or whatever you guys are using, or Active Directory. Put your analysts somewhere else in your operations team. And then if you've got 1 through 3, well, then ask your IT to provide you a report of the above items. Because if you already have a report on your data classification, your inventory your hardware inventory, and your employees are already in groups, then you're already ready to document your current state. And then you can start talking about the policies on access control. But really, you need those top 3 items to be able to talk about access rights control. So that's somewhere you can start. And again, start working on mobile device management, especially on those bring your own BYOD, or bring your own devices. Because those are questions auditors are also going to be asking is, do you own your cell phone, or do you own your end user's cell phones? And how are you controlling them? So mobile device management kind of directly ties into this. And I just noticed we only have 3 minutes left here. So we'll jump into data loss prevention here. Data loss prevention is ensuring end users can't expose your data accidentally or maliciously. So you're protecting all your data. You've got, your access right controls all set up. So now how are you making sure that your data doesn't get off the premises on accident? Well, what is compliant in data loss prevention? Again, you'll probably notice a pattern here, a documented policy. And then in that policy, you're going to explain how you're mitigating the loss of DLP through configurations or different software you purchased. And then you want to be able to show activity on that. So you want to say, yes, we have DLP. We're using this software, these configurations, and we can show you what happens if somebody tries to send a sensitive file off the network. So what is secure when it comes to data loss prevention? Well, this one is a highly technical one, but you can go a number of routes. You can use something called user behavior analytics. This is essentially finding out any anomalous behavior your end users are doing. So if Joe the accountant or Joe the analyst does the same thing every day and suddenly does something new, UBA will flag that and let you know. Machine learning can go into that, SIMs, honeypots. These are technical terms. Honeypot is essentially putting something that looks like it's part of your infrastructure with the hopes that someone will accidentally or maliciously hit it. It just basically it's pretty much a trap, right? And then also for security with DLP, you have to think about your data at rest, while it's in use, and in motion, because DLP really likes to focus on things in motion, like trying to be emailed out, but you also need to be thinking about what's happening while it's in use and at rest. So for action items here, again, this ties directly in with data classification and figuring out which forms are restricted. What you can do right now for DLP is investigate DLP settings in your current email provider. I know O365 and G Suite have it, so definitely take a look. If you don't have it in there, see what other configurations are available in your environment. Talk with security professionals on options and test what you have. And I want to get through this really quickly here. I'll give you guys back the rest of your day here, but governance and risk assessment. Remember how earlier I had talked about security and compliance are two separate things? GRC likes to set the marriage between them. It talks about how are you handling compliance while still staying secure and vice versa. So what's compliant in GRC? Well, can your governance risk committee identify and categorize risks? Can they delegate the remediation of those risks? And are you actively remediating? And are you scheduling those assessments? So essentially, do you know what's wrong with your environment right now? Do you have a top 10 or a top 5? And are you actually working on your top 1 right now? And when do you schedule the assessments to find new risks? Is pretty much what they're looking for here. Now, this one I could do an entire presentation on how to be secure, but what does it mean to be secure? Well, regularly review your prioritization. If you haven't done anything with your vulnerabilities, chances are your top 1 may not be a top 1 anymore. Your 5th one may actually already become your highest vulnerability at this point. So another thing you need to do is discover your accepted risks. Every organization will have them, no matter how big or small. Do you know what your risks are that you can't change or that you're not willing to change? That's good. That's a good thing to know. It doesn't mean you can't have risks. It means you should know where your risks are. Include your vendors on this. Your vendors are an extension of you, and just assume any vulnerabilities they have, you have. And to prove that, just take a look at some of the most recent, largest breaches. If they get compromised, assume that you could be compromised as well. Understand the difference and the importance of pen tests and vuln scans. Pen test is your external defenses. It's the outside trying to get in, whereas a vuln scan is more an internal look on every device connected to your network. So you'll see a lot of cybersecurity companies trying to sell you a vulnerability scan in disguise as a pen test. So you're not truly getting a penetration test. You're just getting a vuln scan. So I can guarantee you this, if you have paid for a penetration test that took 8 hours, you just bought a vulnerability scan. So just some things to make sure you're aware of. And make sure your GRC is fully integrated into your culture. It should be your operations, your vendors. Everybody should know about your GRC, and it should be governing a lot. It should be a part of and governing a lot of your other activities. So what are some action items you can do to get a GRC right now? Well, if you don't have anybody in the GRC, start picking your members. Do you have a compliance officer? Obviously, they're going to be involved. Your COO may want to be involved. Your head of IT and your head of security are definitely going to need to be involved. Your office manager will probably be. Think about who you want involved to delegate and decide the risks within there, but you need to make sure you have a technology presence. If you are absolutely nowhere with this, well, start with a vuln scan and or a penetration test. If you like to talk about which ones may be more valuable for your environment, I'm happy to give you information. But just remember, these are separate things and they're not interchangeable. So, but yeah, schedule those and that'll get you those initial list of items to prioritize. And work with your security team to prioritize any known vulnerabilities and risks you have right now. And if you already have a GRC, ask yourself, when did you prioritize last? Did you guys go through your top 10 list or your entire vulnerabilities to see if maybe they've shifted around? And if you already have that, well, integrate your GRC more into the company. Get your end users more involved in that. So, okay, last slide here. I'll get you guys going. We'll talk about just some final takeaways here. And that shows you my how good I am at PowerPoint. Be proactive on implementation here. And make sure you're documenting every security effort you have. But number 1 here, which I don't know why it's coming third, don't panic. Just make sure you're documenting things, you're being proactive, and that you're not waiting until the auditors come through. And know that investors care. A lot of our clients have shown us questionnaires from investors that are specifically asking cybersecurity questions. It's not just the auditors who could have the power to fine you, it's the investors, the ones that drive you. So it's important to know the investors do care about your cybersecurity efforts. And remember, auditors can definitely detect effort. They know the difference between that person who stayed up all night playing video games and the person who stayed up all night studying but still failed. Awareness culture is vital. Remember that cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility, and your end users are your first and last line of defense. So just on all these points in compliance, just remember that. And most importantly, don't just set it and forget it. This is something that is constantly evolving, and you want to make sure you're staying ahead of it. There is one last thing you can do if you are too afraid to do any of this. You can just simply stick your head in the sand and just hope the auditors don't come, and neither will cyber criminals. So thank you everybody for your time. I apologize for running over 5 minutes. Hope this was informative for you, and feel free to reach out to me directly or just our company if you want any answers or questions answered on any of these points. So thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day.